Ohio State, well, Georgia's number one, Ohio State two, Oregon three, whereas I think Lindy's had Texas three. Well, they're transposed at three and four. Both of them had Ole Miss at five. Then I think Lindy's had Michigan six, Alabama seven. This magazine has Alabama six, Michigan seven. Penn State was, I think, 11 in Lindy's, and they've got them in here at eight. Notre Dame nine, Missouri 10. No other Ohio State opponent besides Oregon, Michigan, and Penn State, which that's three of the top eight if you're scoring at home, is in the top 25. And USC is at number 22. They're the only other Big Ten team that's listed. And then outside the top 25, obviously Iowa is right there, et cetera, so on. But, as I go down, what am I looking at? As I go down and look at it, they are very bullish on Ohio State in terms of individual players. They have a flock of them on their All-American team. They have, whereas Lindy's had Quinshon Judkins, I think, on the first team All-American, Athlon's has Travion Henderson on the first team, and he's on there with Emeka Egbuka at wide receiver, Donovan Jackson offensive line, Denzel Burke at corner, and JT Tuimoloau, five first-team players. And then you have Judkins on the second team with Jack Sawyer, the defensive end, and Tyleik Williams is on the third team. So a flock, almost half the starting lineup is considered an All-American, either first, second, or third team. Conspicuous by his absence, as our friend Vince McMahon used to say, is Caleb Downs. He was not listed on any of the three All-American teams. He was on the All Big Ten first team for this magazine. So, yeah, that was it. Ohio State's running backs, defensive line, and secondary are all considered number one position groups in the country. They are number two at wide receiver, third at quarterback, which it really is a good group of quarterbacks, and seventh at linebacker. So that'll give you the idea. As we talked about, 10th on the offensive line. All of the position groups considered in the national top 10.
My evaluation of Athlon, Street and Smith, Lindy's, all those magazines, not to group them all together, but I'm grouping them all together because obviously they're different entities, but it's kind of difficult to distinguish, looking back over 40 years. But they're great for information. They are great for information. But if I'm looking to see who's got a crystal ball, I don't know who I go to. I guess I go to myself, and I'm not saying I've got the crystal ball. I don't know that anyone has the crystal ball because, Steve, you just ran it down. The top 11 or 12 teams in the country are basically, off by one or two spots. So they pretty much just fall in line with each other in regards to their projections. And we all know that somewhere from 7 to 10 of the top 25 teams in the country to start the season are not going to finish in the top 25 in the country. And what has been my observation, and I have yet to look at these magazines yet, has been you can take last year's standings and you can take this year's predictions, and they're typically off by like one game, unless there's a Colorado outlier where you see, okay, this team's going to be much different this year. Other than that, they're pretty much taking last year, and then they're figuring, okay, Ohio State's supposed to be better. Of course, Michigan's going to fall off a little bit. Oregon's coming to the league. And I guess maybe I'm expecting a little bit too much visionary out of them, and they're basically replicating, and from a prediction standpoint, tweaking what happened last season, and that's not college football. That may be college football in the top 4 or 5, but for the rest of it, it's not, because my own made-up favorite statistic is how many teams change by at least 3 games in the standings from one year to another, and it's roughly a third of the sport in the Power 5. From year to
year. Go ahead, Tony, and I have a take on that as well.
Well, and I think one of the other factors in that formula is, do you have your starting quarterback back? And if you do, you kind of get bumped up a little as well. That's like the number one factor. Do you have your starting quarterback back? Is your head coach back?
Move forward 2 spots.
Yes, that's pretty much it. Collect $200 and go to Park Place. But go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, my take on it is looking at that top 10. I mean, the Big Ten portion of it is all going to play each other, and the SEC portion of it is all going to play each other, give or take. I mean, there's some that won't play each other, but potentially in the championship game, they could play each other, whatever. And what's going to happen is, I'll just throw this team out there. Michigan is probably going to lose 3 or 4 games because they're playing teams that, are, quote unquote, as good or better than them. And I don't see them winning any of those games, in my opinion. But so I think the phenomenon, and we're going to have to come up with a term for it, is okay, it's going to be like it is a lot of years. There's going to be 1 or 2 Big Ten teams at the end of the year with 1 loss or no losses. There's going to be 1, 2, 3 SEC teams at the end of the year with 1 loss or no losses or, whatever. And everybody else is going to be in that 2-loss, 3-loss group. And what do you do? Do you rate an SEC team with 2 or 3 losses ahead of an ACC or Big 12 team that has 0 or 1 losses? And I think what's going to happen is over each progressive year, as we move further into this Big 2 and Little 8, conference setup that we're going into, there's going to be less credence given to ACC and Big 12 teams. I think this year they'll still get the benefit of the doubt that, okay, if Texas Tech, just for lack of a better team, or North Carolina, for lack of a better team, were to pop off in a 12-1 or a, 13-0, certainly they deserve whatever they get. But 11-2, 12-1, are you going to rank an 11-2 North Carolina ahead of a 9-3 Ole Miss? Something like that, or 10-2, 9-3. This year, you may still get away with doing that. In the future, the Reese Davises and the people who are paid to promote the SEC are not going to abide that. They're going to say, oh, they didn't play an SEC schedule. There's no way, so, or Big Ten schedule. That's kind of how they'll look at it. You didn't play an SEC schedule, or a Big Ten schedule. You played an ACC schedule or you played a Big 12 schedule. So you're not going to get the benefit of the doubt in years going forward because you're not one of the top 2 leagues. But this year, it'll be interesting to see how it all meshes together. If a team at the end of the year in the Big 12 goes 11-2, loses the championship game, do they even still get in the playoff? This year, maybe. Future year, Big 12 loser, 11-2, you're going to be down there 11, 12, 13, fighting like hell, going on any talk show you can to say, but, we played Ole Miss close in our one big non-conference game. We lost to them by 3. That's what the message will be.
Sounds like we're preaching, or I guess singing from the same hymnal, but I know hardly nobody knows what a hymnal is.
Oh, well, we're the haves.
But anyway, because basically what it is.
Screw the have-nots. We're the haves.
Because I think the committee's going to try to, or at least, of course, they're going to preach to us that they're taking it as is. They're taking the results as is. Now, we'll see what the non-conference games tell us, if the ACC and the Big 12 can step up and win big non-conference games. But I don't know that they have that many opportunities to do so. Can't think of the Big 12 teams playing that difficult of non-conference games to be able to prove themselves off the top of my head. But I think there's no question the SEC and the Big Ten teams are going to be given the benefit of the doubt with same record. But in terms of what you're telling us, Steve, when you're matching up lesser records in the SEC and the Big Ten, I completely agree with you. As this plays out year after year after year, and if we get the expected results and the narrative and the expected results, especially at the top in the Final Four in the championship games, where there probably be no Big 12 and or ACC teams, that is just going to continue to stir the narrative is going to be backed up, I believe, by the results on the field, and it's all going to be one big cycle and snowball downhill. And yeah, you're going to have to finish first in the ACC or the Big 12, or a strong second. Oklahoma State at 9-4 from last year after losing the Big 12 championship game by 4 touchdowns is not going to cut it.
Well, I know in the Lindy's magazine, they only have one ACC team and one Big 12 team making the playoffs. I don't know what the Athlon magazine has, but 5 SEC teams, 3 Big 10 teams.
I got it.
Notre Dame and Liberty, or whatever, and then ACC and the Big 12.
Athlon, the buys are Georgia, Ohio State. They have Florida State number 3 winning the ACC, and Utah number 4 winning the Big 12. Then they have Oregon from the Big 10 at number 5 going against Liberty, the Conference USA champion, at number 12 in the group of 5 entrant.
We just saw that last year.
Number 11. Yeah, and it didn't go. I don't think it went very well for Liberty, did it? And then number 11, Notre Dame against number 6, Texas. So Notre Dame is not an SEC or Big 10 team, but they're Notre Dame. Penn State versus Ole Miss, that's SEC and Big 10. And then Michigan number 9 at number 8, Alabama, that's SEC Big 10. So, yeah, only one each from the ACC and the Big 12, plus Notre Dame and Liberty, and the rest are SEC and Big 10. It's kind of crazy.
I'm going to be fascinated to see what happens when, say, you have 3 Big 10 teams that finish the regular season with 2 losses, or 1 loss, and then only 2 of those teams can go into play for the conference title. What happens in the committee's eyes when the losing team of the Big 10 championship game drops below what was the 3rd place team in the rankings? Like, does that loss hurt you? Does that loss move the other team that wasn't in the championship game ahead of you? Should it? I don't think it should, since you've already made it past them, but it's going to be fascinating to see. And is somebody going to be left out of the playoffs?
And maybe beat them head to head. Maybe even beat them head to head too.
So there's going to be situations where they have to take a team with a worse record.
Yeah. Yes.
Because of the regular season.
Yep. It's probably going to happen. And of course, if you have a marquee non-conference win or a better, let's say that the first team in your scenario went out of conference and beat Texas, and the second one went out of conference and beat Wake Forest. Well, that Texas win's got to stand up for something. So I think that computes part of the overall picture too. Every team, they talk about in the NCAA tournament, are they really going to take 8 ACC teams this year? Whatever the number is, whatever conference it is, or 9 Big East teams, when they went to that bloated Big East that had like 16 teams in it, are they really going to take 11 of them? Whatever. It's like, it isn't like that. And the Big East found that out the hard way this year in the NCAA tournament, because they had some really good teams like Seton Hall and maybe St. John's at the end deserved it, and they didn't get in. And, it's because you look at each team's resume irrespective of anybody else, and then you vote on, this is the order of these teams. That's how they do it. And, you're not looking to reward one conference, just because of the overall largesse of that conference is the best, or, for 20 years they've dominated. It's got to be resume by resume by resume as best as you can, because it's apples to oranges in most cases, especially in football when you don't play. There's no common opponents for a lot of these teams you're trying to compare. I mean, how do you do it? It's very difficult at times.
To Tony's point, if you take the 10 years of the college football playoff 4-team format and take those college football playoff committee rankings and you look at them prior to the conference championship game, you've got a slew of teams that were safely in the 12-team field had there been one. Then they lose the conference championship game. They drop to 10-3, and they drop lower than 12th in the country. Now, the committee at that time was just looking at just ranking teams after number 5. You don't know if they're going to take that more seriously in regards to, okay, do we truly drop that team? What was their performance in the conference championship game? Did they lose to Ohio State 31-28? Or did they pull a 2014 Wisconsin and get completely annihilated? So a loss is not necessarily a loss.
Yeah, and when Florida State, like last year, had an opportunity to do what Ohio State did against Wisconsin to prove themselves, and they weren't able to do that with a backup quarterback. So what you do in these particular games, like all games are created differently, and the outcomes all carry their own significant kinds of weight, because if Ohio State loses 2 games, like loses to their top 2 opponents, they don't have the non-conference to lift them up over that. And Michigan could lose 2 conference games but beat Texas, and that forgives essentially both of those losses against somebody else that they're competing for a spot in. So certainly not all losses are created equally. And when Ohio State has the non-conference schedule that they do, you better not trip up, because it's going to be really hard for you to make it up.
Now, unless I misread this, the FPI has Ohio State with a tougher schedule than Michigan by 1 spot. That's what I saw. I saw it's 17 versus 18 in the country. Now, I just pulled up the FPI, but they don't have the schedule rankings on the FPI. But I read that in an article, and I thought, okay, well, of course, we know that Texas is on Michigan's schedule and Ohio State has no one.
Yeah,
but
must be weighted in one way or the other to really give you a lot of credit for playing top 10 teams or whatever is the only thing I can think of.
Because if you look at like the teams that are ranked or could be ranked, Ohio State has Iowa, Oregon. Do you want to throw Nebraska in there, and Penn State and Michigan? Michigan would have Texas. Do you want to throw USC in there? Do you want to throw Washington in there? And then Oregon and Ohio State. So I don't know. That's certainly makes you go, that sort of thing when you consider the non-conference situation, and the fact that Ohio State never has to play Ohio State, which automatically makes their schedule easier than somebody who does have to play them, like Michigan.
Washington, I don't think gives them any credit at all. Just the complete. I mean, they're going to be lucky to go 6-6, doesn't it sound like? I mean, with the mass exodus. So, if they factored that in and the relative worth of Washington, Iowa and Nebraska would certainly be ahead of them. But again, we're now we're down in the 20s and 30s trying to split hairs, and it just it's a big who cares to me. I mean, I don't see where this means much. At this point, I think it's all you can do to put together a coherent top 10, in my opinion, and then try and I don't know. I think something has to be said. When you take the field to play a top 10 team, you could lose that game. I mean, you could win by 2 touchdowns or you could lose by 2 touchdowns, home or away. I mean, we've seen it. I mean, different things have happened. I mean, that big Georgia-Tennessee game a year or 2 ago was such a big freaking deal. And didn't Georgia go in there and just run rule them or something? I mean, it's like, I don't know. You're at peril. When you're playing a top 10 team, your place or their place, you're in peril. And so I think when you look at, 1/4 of your schedule are games that, could go either way. I mean, realistically could go either way. I think that's what makes Ohio State's schedule a little bit more difficult. I mean, Michigan has, theoretically a 75 to 80% chance to win 8 of its games, theoretically. I think the other 4 are probably more in the 40 to 60 range, but,
Well, I've got to think that this FPI, and I've seen other metrics and services that have Oregon a smidge ahead of Ohio State, and that's simply based on that game being played in Eugene, I think.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I do also recall Ryan Day's first team in 2019 having, I believe, a 6% chance of winning the Big Ten, according to the FPI, because they had a new quarterback and a new coach. And so there are just slight fallacies in the system.
He looked like dog crap in the spring game, and then came out, and really didn't play well against Minnesota, and they got hurt. And then after that, like the light bulb went on for him, and he was fabulous after that. But yeah.
Well, the problem with the computer stuff is early in the season, all of the data is not. It's pretty flawed. It's based on, it's not based on what has happened yet this year. It's based on what has happened last year and the people coming back. So it gets more fine tuned as the season goes on when there's actual data to feed it.
Talking about being fine-tuned, Ohio State's academic standing right now. Harvard, Ohio State, right? Both number one, APR. We had Bill Bender from Sporting News on, and he was talking about his have and have not model of if there's a 40-team cut, and he instituted a academic component that most people would scoff at, but Ohio State showing up with a fine APR number, number one in the country, which for somebody who's unfamiliar, it's just basically progress toward graduation rate.
Yeah, and I think that's tremendously indicative, I think, of the investment, that Gene Smith and everybody has made into academic support for these players at Ohio State is second to none. And they have the Success Center, and that's been online for about 15 or 20 years now, and different resources. They have everything at their disposal to succeed academically, and they are making sure that nobody falls between the cracks. And so that is Ryan Day, I think, one of his legacies. He's graduating his players. And I know in this day and age, when all anybody cares about is being in the playoff and winning the playoff and beating Michigan and whatever else, there are still some people somewhere who think it is pretty good that, whatever the mission is, that should be part of it, graduating your players and making sure that people succeed at the game of life. And I think that there's still something to be said for that. And even in this transient time where guys are, leaving and coming on board, even the guys who left are leaving on good terms academically. And that is important in terms of that APR ranking as well. It says they had no black marks against them at all, is what it says to me. So just tremendously impressive. They're going to have a lot of guys playing with degrees this fall, with so many guys that came back. Maybe a record number of guys with degrees this year. I don't know, but it is very telling of what the program is all about. And again, this is something that you hold up and you show the moms and dads of these prospects and say, look, we will stand behind your son. We will support them. We will make sure they cross the finish line, because we've done it with all these other guys this last 5 or 10 years, as our number one ranking in the country will illustrate.
Well,
there's nobody better at this than what we're doing.
Yeah. Steve, I mentioned this on the radio here earlier in the week about how, 30 years ago, you're wondering, boy, I hope this guy can be eligible. I hope this guy can pass his classes, and he's starting linebacker or starting safety or this top prospect can be eligible. You don't have those concerns. When was the last time, when was the last time there were even rumors of somebody being ineligible? And boy, this guy's going to have to take some summer classes and summer courses to be able to be on the field for the Buckeyes. It doesn't happen anymore. And they have so many resources, as Steve said, and to make the grade. And they're not alone. You've Penn State and Michigan have all of these places. If you've invested so much, you've got to spend all of this money somewhere. So why not put some of it into academics? Now, I do wonder, will the academics start to suffer now that you have to put the money into the players themselves? What else starts to suffer? The buildings, the nutrition, whatever, because or the coaching salaries, perhaps, crazy thought, or the number of staff on your coaching staff, where the money's going to have to go to the players, so it's got to come from somewhere else.
There were about 80 players and coaches nominated for the College Football Hall of Fame, or were placed on the final list of candidates, I should say, for the College Football Hall of Fame, including Urban Meyer and James Laurinaitis. I got to think slam dunk, rubber stamp it, move it forward for those two.
I think Laurinaitis has been on it a couple of years now, but I mean, Chris Spielman didn't get inducted until 2009. So, like, I mean,
And
if he's got to
amazingly,
wait
years after Pat Fitzgerald got in, who played 10 years after him.
Mm-hmm.
Go explain that to somebody.
But I'm with you. Laurinaitis, 3-time All-American, Nagurski winner, Butkus winner. He'll eventually get in.
Whether it's this year or not.
Yeah. I'd like to see him make Nick Saban wait, just because it's the whole Ted Williams thing or whatever. It's the baseball voters. Nobody gets to go in on the first ballot.
All right. Yes. Urban Meyer, 187-32. So much better record
Urban
than Nick
Myers.
Saban.
I'm going to put on my list for Ross.
Yeah.
Put it on my list for Ross Bjork. He's got to get that sign up there for Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel. If Paul Brown and Woody Hayes have them, then those two pikers deserve it as well.
I believe so. Tony, what's going on at Buckeye Huddle and, of course, the Buckeye Weekly podcast?
Buckeye Weekly, we were just streaming at 10 o'clock this morning to talk about camp and the stuff that we saw at camp. So that'll be an audio edition of that will be coming out later this afternoon. Writing, talking after with some of these prospects, writing stories on that, and also continuing my series of previewing the upcoming season through various top matchups for the Buckeyes individually and predictions and things of that nature where, some various things that I'm writing about that you can find at buckeyehuddle.com to pass your time.
Steve, I'm thinking at this point, Bucknuts doesn't even exist in your world.
Well,
for at least a few days.
I'm enjoying the work of Bill Kurlick and Patrick Murphy from afar as they cover the camp. I'm like Axel Foley in Beverly Hills Cop after, is this the man who wrecked the buffet at the Harrow Club? And they ask him what he's doing there, and he says, I'm on vacation. So, that's me. I keep saying it all week. I'm on vacation. So there you go.